In Modern, one of the most powerful cards used to be Urza Lordhide Artificer, which is a 4-drop 1/4 that reads, when Urza Lordhide Artificer enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 colors construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Tap an untapped artifact you control, add 1 blue. Pay 5 generic mana, shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. The reason this used to be so dominant in the Modern format was because it is a Tolarian Academy and it has 2 good bodies. And if you're super desperate, you can also sink all of the mana into Urza, getting you card advantage. But with many of the artifacts that made this card powerful, like Astrolabe and Mox Opal getting banned alongside Oko, this card has never been the same. But in today's video, you're going to be abusing this card alongside 2 of the most powerful spells in Magic history. Those 2 spells are Paradoxical Outcome and Upheaval. Paradoxical Outcome, which is a vintage powerhouse, is a 4-mana instant that reads, return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hand. Draw a card for each card returned to your hand this way. This, alongside all of our cheap artifacts, means that this can easily be a draw 10 to 15 cards. And if we have an Urza out, all of our 1-drop artifacts are also free. But drawing a bunch of cards doesn't win the game, so winning the game comes down to Upheaval, which is a 6-mana sorcery that reads, return all permanents to their owner's hands. While this sorcery does not look that powerful, in today's video we're going to be abusing it and showing you why this is a broken win con in the Modern format. In match 1, our starting hand looks very strange, but with 4 0-drop artifacts and an island, this is actually a keep. While traditionally having a 5-drop and a 7-drop with only 1 land doesn't seem like a good idea, Thoughtcast and Thought Monitor are actually affinity for artifact cards, meaning that we can cast Thoughtcast on turn 1. And if we find a land and an artifact next turn, we can also play the Thought Monitor. So we end up keeping this hand. So on our first turn, we play all of our artifacts out and go turn 1 Thoughtcast, drawing Shadowspear and Sigh. On our second turn, we find a Darksteel Citadel, so we play Shadowspear into a Thought Monitor, finding Urza and Urza Saga. Opponent casts a dead on our end step, showing that they're probably your team of Rhinos. The reason that we know this is team of Rhinos is because they are using the card Dead Gone, which is only used in Cascade decks because the CMC on the spell is actually 4 instead of 1. And that's important because they are trying to cascade into a 0-drop, which means they have no 1 or 2 drops in the deck, other than Crashing Footfalls, of course. So on our third turn, we end up playing our Urza Saga into a Sigh, attacking for 1 damage and passing to the opponent. They again do nothing on turn 3, and that gives us the green light to go. Cast out a Memnite into a Thought Monitor, getting 2 1/1 flyers. Finally find our 4th land, which means next turn we can play Urza into an Upheaval. On our end step, they cascade into a Crashing Footfalls, but at this point, the 2 4/4s are going to do nothing. We could win this game with just Urza Saga making huge constructs. And before we even get to cast our Urza or do anything else, the opponent scoops it up. In game 2, we got onto the board pretty early. We got it to Fairy down, but they ended up having the Fury into Okana Rhinos, which was too much for us, and then they had another one as well. We've tried to get back onto the board, slamming into Fairy, bouncing a Rhino, killing it off, and trying to stabilize at 1 to 2 life. And as you can see, we were about to turn the corner in this game. Our opponent cracked their Canopy land, attacked in. We thought we were going to be in a great spot, stabilizing at 1 life, blocking with the Thought Monitor, but they ended up having a Boseiju, which killed us there and just was unfortunate. And in game 3, our turn 1 was amazing. We had a great start. We had turn 1 Emery, but our opponent had a turn 1 Force of Vigor and untapped into a Dead Gone, completely removing our entire board. And we just never restabilized at this point. Again, we tried stabilizing at maybe 1 to 2 life, but they had Brazen Borrower into a Boseiju, killing us. Just a friendly reminder to leave a subscribe. It really helps me out, and it's free to do. Match 2, we're on the draw, and our opponent leads off on a Thoughtseize, taking our Emery Lurker Lock, which is our entire game plan. So the hand looks a little bit bad here. We end up finding an Upheaval, which doesn't really help much, but we play out all of our stuff and a Saga. We both don't really do anything for a few turns. Opponent ends up resolving a Fable, and we end up finding 2 creatures, which we can play out and still tap to make mana, getting us some constructs in the meantime. Opponent plays out a Wrenn and 6, kills our Esper Sentinel, but we still get to make constructs, which are hard to deal with, but they do have the Fatal Push there. Ornithopter is a fine draw, which means that we can grab Springleaf Drum and make 4 mana next turn because the construct and the Ornithopter each will tap for mana with Springleaf Drums, giving us the option to cast Paradoxical Outcome and draw a few cards. On the opponent's turn, they play out a Tireless Tracker into a main deck Haywire Might, which was definitely scary, but we just cast our Paradoxical Outcome, drawing 5 cards and picking up 5 permanents, and then we just spew them back out. And since they all cost 1 or 0 mana, that means we can play a lot out and even cast out a Thought Monitor that we top deck. And off the Thought Monitor, we draw an Urza, which means that we can hard cast that the next turn and absolutely go off. We cast a PO, bouncing so many things back to our hand, and we end up bouncing 11 things to our hand, which means the game is just over. We accidentally bounced the Urza, so it just took an extra turn, but we end up just playing it the next turn, upheavaling at Paradoxical Outcoming in response to the Upheaval, bouncing all of our stuff, and then we draw another 20-ish cards, and then we play an Urza after the fact with the Vanna floating. And after we have Urza down, you can see what ends up happening. Our opponent has 0 permanents, and we have, well, let's just say a few permanents. And on their turn, they just go force into Haywire Might, and seeing the writing on the wall, we get into game number 2. For game 2, they have a similar start with Shocking In and Inquisitioning us, taking our Sai. That's not that big of a deal. We end up finding an Ornithopter, which means that we can play Ornithopter into Springleaf Drum into Esper Sentinel, which is quite a good curve on turn 1. Our opponent ends up just hard casting a Ragavan rather than dashing and playing land. And on our turn, we top deck an Urza, which is an amazing draw. We play our land out, play a Moonsnare prototype into a Thought Monitor, and we barely have enough mana because of all the artifacts and them producing mana. The Thought Monitor ends up finding a Darksteel Citadel and another Urza, which is a fine draw yet again. On our end step, they end up finding a tap land. They just go straight into combat, attacking us, and we don't really care about them exiling our top cards, so we let this happen. They end up casting a Wrenn and 6 and paying for the Esper Sentinel tax. Pinging down our Esper Sentinel, we just untap, attack Wrenn and 6 down with our Thought Monitor. They don't have a removal spell, so we just go land into Urza, getting ourselves some extra mana and a large construct. An opponent untaps, seeing that they're just going to die to this Urza, and scoops them up. Let's get into match number 3. Match 3, we got paired up against Scam. In game 1, they ended up just thought seizing us quite a few times, so we just top decked a few Urza Saga, found a Urza at some point, slammed it onto the battlefield, and just completely dominated the game, because Urza Saga against Scam, if they don't have a Blood Moon, is just game over. This land is way too powerful, and they just don't have any way to deal with it other than Blood Moon. So we get game 1, and in game 2, we have a very similar play where they just didn't even cast a spell till turn 5, casting a Fury, which we just dismembered, and then they slam a Torok the following turn, taking both of our Teferis, which are not that relevant in the matchup and wouldn't be doing much on this board. And the fact that we just have an Urza Saga about to pump out another construct, our opponent just knows that they're going to be screwed. They play out a Ragavan, which does absolutely nothing against this board. We're going to find a Shadow Spear, trample over all of their small creatures, and opponent scoops them up. Match 4, Tragedy struck when we got paired up against Cabal Coffers. This is the deck that's similar to Tron that just tries to pump out a bunch of mana, and they have a great deal of interaction. They end up damnation us game 1 into Karn, which shuts down everything because at heart we are an affinity deck, and we just cannot beat that, so we scoop them up. In game number 2, we did end up resolving an Urza after Karn, which makes all of our artifacts still able to tap for blue mana, and then we got to resolve an Upheaval somehow through a Karn and an Ensnaring Bridge, and they just scoop it up there because they cannot beat an Upheaval, because we're going to be deploying our Urza the same turn, and they're not going to have any permanents, and we're going to have an Urza. So somehow we did sneak out one game against them. And in game number 3, we kept a fine hand that had a Bobble and 2 Esper Sentinels. We did end up deploying an Esper Sentinel on turn 1. On their turn 2, they play out an EE for 1, which completely slows us down, because if we deploy out the other Esper Sentinel, it just gets destroyed by engineered explosives, meaning that we just had to play slow. And against the deck that wants to go long and has Karn just completely shut us out, means that we're not going to be able to win this one. They just end up resolving a Karn when we still have nothing on the board, and we just scoop them up. In match number 5, we get paired up against Mono White Humans. In game 1, we just draw a bunch of Urza Saga, which means that they just cannot beat our huge creatures, so they scoop them up. In game 2, we have an explosive turn 2, playing out an Ornithopter into a Mishra's Bauble, shocking in a Hallowed Fountain, and playing out a Thought Monitor, which draws into Island and a Thought Cast. They only play out a Cathar Commando, which is a fairly decent card against traditional affinity, but we're not that, into an Anointed Peacekeeper, naming Urza. But we do have the Dismember, meaning that we can kill it. We try and block the Cathar Commando, and our opponent casts a crazy card, Shining Shoal from Betrayers of Kamigawa, which takes out our Thought Monitor and our Ornithopter, limiting our artifact count. But even after this great play by the opponent, we end up getting an Island, we kill the Anointed Peacekeeper, run out our Thought Cast, draw a Mistress Bauble and an Emery. On their turn, they play out a Thalia for 2 mana, attacking with the Cathar Commando. We just take it, and we untap, slamming Emery, milling over some cards, then playing a Thought Monitor that we top deck, which just resolves, drawing us another land and a Memnite, making our next turn insanely powerful if we get to it. Our opponent just cast an Adeline, and at this point, we knew the game was over. While our opponent could attack us for 6 damage with the Cathar Commando dealing 3, the Thalia dealing 2, and the token they get off of Adeline dealing an extra 1, we still just block, realizing that we have 0 ways of losing this game. We untap, find a land, cast out our Urza, go to tap our artifacts, and our opponent scoops them up before we even get to cast a PO, which would have bounced 6 cards, drawing us 6, and having a Thought Monitor be one of them, which would have made us draw an additional 2, and all of the 0 drops, which tap for an additional mana because of Urza. So we go to activate Emery, and in response, they concede, giving us the 3-2, wrapping up a great video. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one.